done. As a relationship coach, why does it seem that most couples are struggling to sustain happy and healthy relationships?
Ooh, starting off with a big question, Daniel. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Doesn't get much bigger and broader than that.
I know, right?
Oh, well, I don't have all the answers, but I will tell you my thoughts. Um, I think this goes deep. I think, the more I learn about it and the older I get, the more I feel that most of us, at least in America, were not taught some really fundamental things in school or just in our early years, like really basic, fundamental how to see through each other's lens, how to communicate effectively, how to find the right time and place to have certain conversations, how to understand that often the things that feel personal or triggering are just because somebody is seeing the same situation through different eyes. And once we get sort of dysregulated, it can be very hard to come back. I just think there's some very foundational things that the good news is they're pretty simple when you learn about sort of the neuroscience of habits and patterns and why human brains are designed to lock into things and then stay with them even when they're not working. Then we know how to fix it and unravel it and find new ways. But we're not taught that. So I think it goes really deep. And I think people struggle with happiness because once they feel that either the tension or the separation, they get locked into that mode and it becomes really hard to come back sometimes.
It's very interesting what you said about that we are not being taught in schools or anywhere how to communicate, how to basically, yes, how to deliver a message, how to take message, how to be more empathetic, how to control our emotions. But to be honest with you, I mean, at least on my end, I can look at the teachers I had, or even my parents, or even my uncles, and they didn't know either. So it's like,
Right, right.
it, to me, it's like, okay,
I thought for a moment we're about to be that exception who was like, I learned everything, right?
no, 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 no. I had to work, but
Yeah.
again, in my end, just because I'm very curious, I'm very much into the self growth and always learn new things. But yes, when you were mentioning that, I was like, looking back, it's like, okay, see, here's the thing. I can quote unquote blame my parents for a lot of things, but I even told them, it's like, you guys didn't know any better. So everything that you guys did was from a place of love. But even looking at their relationships, like, I can see things that I don't want my relationship it to be like, but that I can tell that they are having those, whether relationship struggles or even communication issues, based on learned behaviors from their parents and their grandparents. So when it comes to this, it's just, how do you fix this problem if we assume, and again, and I don't have numbers obviously, but that the large majority of people don't know this, because it goes from generation to the next one, and no one is teaching the other one these skills.
Oh gosh, exactly. I mean, that is one of the most bittersweet gifts of my work that I'm so passionate about is this really is about breaking generational patterns, right? Both in terms of our triggers and our trauma, but also just in terms of the things we're passed on that no longer fit, right? That just don't make sense. Um, I think about this old legend, this story of like this family that passed down this holiday pot roast that was this just passed on generation to generation and generation, and finally the great great grandson gets married and they're showing her, here's the recipe, this is what you do, and she's like, why do you cut the ends off? And they're all like, I don't know. So they trace it back, they trace it back, they trace it back, and then they go, oh, because the pan used to be too small, right? And it's just like we all do these things that are just, we do it because our brains are wired to stick with patterns. They're wired to stick with what's familiar. And the comfort zone is really uncomfortable. You can't grow and learn in there. And so this is generational. And I'm sorry, I'm getting away from your question, which is then what do we do about it? I'm so passionate about this work. And of course, working with people one on one, the good news is that so often the most common heart of what people come to me for is, are the issues that we're having foundational or are they fixable? That's it. And probably 95% of the time, they're fixable. These are not things at the core of who we are. So often, both people actually want the same thing. They want to be heard, they want to feel appreciated, they want deeper connection, they want to feel like partners. So that's the good news. The good news is there's really simple tools all of us can learn that can help us build those connections. And they work with parent and child, they work with siblings, they work with parents, they work with friends. The bigger picture is I'd love to share some of these things with other coaches and counselors, and I'd love to eventually bring it into schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is something that not many people are talking about. See, here's the thing: as a society, I think that we know how to communicate just because we know how to speak, but we don't even know how to deliver a message just because everyone has a different lens, everyone lives a different reality, and it just what you see is not what the other person sees. And by the way, I really like your story of this family because it showcase what we have experienced through the habits or just learned behaviors that, oh, we don't question anything just because that's how life is, right? We don't know any better until we get face I mean until find we struggle. Once we find those struggles, it's okay, something's wrong, something's not working. And if we have enough self-awareness, we can, okay, it's probably on me and not on the other person. Speaking of self-awareness, because I think that this is, to me, is the biggest one of the biggest issues, especially when it comes to close relationships, I say siblings or father and son, or mother and son, or just in couples, having enough self-awareness to understand how they're being perceived things and how it's not about them but about the whole situation, is about the whole problem. How can couples as an as you know, as a couples, as an individuals, gain more self-awareness so they understand that it's not me against you, but it's us against the problem?
Mm. Instead of going off on a long tangent, I'm going to give you one very, very simple answer that may or may not work. One of my favorite exercises for myself is to just ask, am I sure? So whenever I think, and I suggest this to all my couples, if you think your partner is saying something to hurt you, to offend you, to disrespect you, to forget to do something for you, to, be inconsiderate towards you, are you sure? Could there be another explanation? And often in that, just that question, it goes back to there's this whole school of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, which really has to do with sort of questioning your assumptions versus the facts. And often our assumptions, not always, but often when we make assumptions, it comes from trauma or it comes from difficult experiences in our past where we're assuming the negative. By the way, our brains are wired for negativity bias. That's a thing that goes back to cave days when we had to always be protecting ourselves physically. So we are wired for negativity bias. So it's really common to think your partner's coming from a negative place when that's not their construct at all. So often when arguments sort of devolve into be nicer to me next time, don't disrespect me, take me more into consideration, the other person might be like, okay, I'll try, but they don't know that they ever did that to begin with. So sometimes when you ask, how can we do it from the self awareness thing? I think that's a good start, is just to say, if I think that this is what's coming across from the other person, or I think this is the reality of the situation and it feels really negative, am I sure? Could there be an alternate explanation? And then I guess the next step is then ask. Don't make assumptions. Ask. Hey, was that said intentionally to hurt me? Are you lashing out? Is there a reason for that? Or was that just, did you actually forget? Or, what's going on here? Let me understand.
I've always said that assumptions get you in trouble. And anytime that I've assumed things, like, okay, I was wrong. But we are too afraid to ask. I think we're too either too afraid to ask, or our ego doesn't let us ask because we know better, right? And I think it becomes at some point a battle of egos, and see who can win. And when you try to get a winner, both of them lose.
That's right.
And to me, honestly, even though all the things that you're saying, because to me, a lot of things in life are simple. They're hard, but they're very, very simple. Just
Exactly.
to understand, it's like, okay, when somebody is in the emotion and somebody needs to ask themselves, like, am I sure? I don't know if that kind of person can start training themselves before the argument, before the emotion, because at least on my, I mean, on my experience in the past, when I've been in the middle of the emotion, I don't think rationally. I mean,
Yes,
I'm just
that is true.
emotional. So building some habits beforehand, so we're preventive rather than just reactive, and and
100%.
and just having that knee jerk reaction that a lot of us have, and then we kind of regret.
Absolutely. And then you're so right about that, by the way. That's really, really true. Is once we're dysregulated, we're offline, right? There's no, you have to be able to course through that before you can come back to rational. You're right, where you can have that processing. So I do think it's a practice. You can practice moment to moment to just go on almost everything where you feel yourself getting defensive or reactive anywhere, not just with your partner, to go, wait, am I sure that I'm understanding the situation properly? Am I sure that it's them and not me? Am I sure that, right? And I love what you said, because I say that all the time. All of these things are simple, but they're not easy. These are
Yeah.
not these are the hardest work there is, because often, even as simple as that is, to go, is it fact or is it assumption? We don't know. It feels like fact in the moment when you're triggered. And you have to stop and go, is there even a 5% possibility it could be something else? Um, and that's true. I mean, all this stuff, right? Politics, religion, sex, all these constructs that get passed down about what we should believe, how we should act and react in the world. It's all the same thing. We have to stop and go, wait a minute, do I actually know this to be true? Or was it just instilled upon me and I took it at face value? Yeah, not easy.
uh honestly, that's what I've been seeing in society, especially lately, with how divided everyone is, and not only politics, but beliefs, almost anything. I was just having a conversation probably 3 weeks ago with a good friend of mine that I've known for many years, and we had a different. I mean, we had different opinions about a particular topic. Now, I practice and I know how to, you know, be calm, be relaxed, even if somebody's quote unquote attacking my beliefs. And I could see how at some point it was turning hostile, and the other person seemed to be sort of attacking me in a very condescending way. But to me, it's like, okay, something's been triggered in him.
Good
I'm
for
just,
you.
ju- I'm just going to try to, because at the end of the day, here's I think one of the things I learned during my relationship, was that if you have different beliefs or different opinions about something, if your goal is to change the other person's mind, you cannot start saying that you're wrong or attacking the other person, because the other person will shut down. And I think that's what most people are doing. If you want to solve an issue, just try to address, hey, I can see how you see it from that point of view, but what if you look at it from, try to find another way. And we don't have the patience to even do that, I
That's
think.
so well put. That's so well put. And I love that you were able to be in that space when you felt that the person was being condescending and you felt attacked and you had that moment where you're like, wait a minute, this
Mm,
probably has nothing to do with me. This is this person having an experience because they feel passionate about this and it really is not about me. That's hard to do in the moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and once again, it took me years just to become better at this, and all, and I will credit to my curiosity, my desire of always improving, and especially as and we talk off cameras that, yeah, I got divorced a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I had to evaluate the last 9 years of my relationship and see, okay, what things I did wrong, what things I could have done better, and what happened. So if I don't learn, then it's kind of pointless, because I got the experience, but without the lessons. And because of we are in the topic of relationships and love, I don't know. I do have the feeling that people have misconceptions about healthy and thriving relationship. In your experience, what are these misconceptions that if it seems like that most people have?
Well, one of the most common ones is that, of course, you're not supposed to be super physically intimate and have a thriving sex life after X period of time, right? That's like common thing that has to go. It doesn't have to go away, right? Um, I am honestly, Daniel, I am shocked how many couples don't talk, don't have real, deep, regular, meaningful conversations. I'm shocked how common that is. That's shocking to me. They might talk about day to day stuff like how was work? It was fine. How are the kids? They're fine. But to actually have these regular, intentional, thought provoking, intimate conversations, it's not happening a lot of the time. And I think there's a lot of these sort of, to me, I don't know, even misconception is like, if that's your experience, that's your reality, but it doesn't need to be that way, right? So, one of the things I feel really strongly about is planned spontaneity or like scheduling time and rituals without that feeling like you're overburdening your schedule. But it actually can have the opposite effect. So often, I think we're so swept up in the chaos of modern life, in work, in social media, in kids, that every little ounce of space is filled up. And couples lose each other. And that's where things, I think that's an expectation that, like, yeah, we're just too busy to do anything else. But that has to be blocked off first. You have to schedule in regular time for quality conversation, for romantic dates, for even scheduling intimacy, like whatever it takes, so and that's what it takes to shift the pattern. You don't have to keep talking about breaking the pattern. You have to actually like do some actions towards it, and that can shift the habits and the patterns that have built up.
Yeah, I think that after a few years, we kind of lose the intentionality. It becomes almost like routine.
Right.
And I wonder if other countries are having the same issue. And the reason why I'm bringing this up because I do know that we live in a busyness culture, that we need to be busy all the time, that we need to pack our schedule, that we need to hustle all the time. I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the problem. I'm always trying to do more, and be more productive. And I think that when you are overloaded with tasks, and especially if you have kids, and then you have to a soccer practice, and then you have to take it to ballet, and then you need to take them to school and do work and the homework, and then you don't have time to do any of this. But one thing that you said, that I've been having this theory in mind for a while, that when couples don't speak to each other, and to me, I thought about it, it's like, wait a minute, that is supposed to be quote unquote your best friend. And if you don't feel safe speaking with your best friend, then you're never going to feel safe speaking anywhere else. And I'm one of those people who believe, and I don't know if this has been an issue, lately, or this always been like this, that to me, the friendship, friends before lovers create the best relationships, because you already know the person, and then even early in the relationship, you know how to navigate those complicated waters, because you understand the other person, and then you create like a stronger bond. But those people who start dating first and then expect to become friends afterwards might have like a harder time, because there's not you haven't unlocked that level of vulnerability yet. So I don't know if that's true, or just it's just my perception, as something that I've been feeling about lately. And I've shared with other people, my with other people I know, my best relationships have been those who we were friends first, and then that organically evolved into something else.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're right. I don't think, to your point, it doesn't have to be that way. Relationships can look all sorts of ways. But I am surprised how often people start from the relationship and never get back to that foundation of trust and communication and deep conversation and comfort and all of that. So yeah, but it can, you can get there. It can be all different ways that you create this. I think it's, again, to me, what's kind of bittersweet is how often couples come in and they feel so far apart. This is often their last ditch effort. This is it. We've either been living in these siloed lives, feeling like roommates, or we're so at each other's throats and it's always tension, but they want the same thing. They just don't know how to climb over the bridge to each other. Oh,
Okay, because you said this, and I'm glad you did, because you just unlocked a thought that I
Hmm.
didn't think about it before. Well, I did, but then, for this conversation, it seems to me, well, definitely happened in my relationship, that when couples go to couple therapy, it's already too late. Someone already either has built enough resentment, or checked out completely emotionally. So it's almost like, okay, how do you prevent that? Because when things are good, nobody thinks that they should go into couple therapy or talk about it. I've talked to a couple of friends of mine in the last few years, because every now and then they approach me and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. And I've told them in the past, hey, if I were you, again, you are free to do whatever you want. I would go to couples therapy, because I see that you guys need a third party that can help you understand each other. No, I think we're good. We're good. And a few months later, maybe a year later, they would just, break up. And even though that has been my advice to them, I was at fault as well for not doing that with my relationship. When we By the time we went, it was too late. How can we get better at this? Because we don't do anything until things get really, really bad. But then by the time things get really, really, really bad, it's almost like no comeback from that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Well, I told you I want to actually get this in the school system so we don't get to this point. But at this stage, I started off as a premarital counselor. That's my background. And so any couple, even if they're not already engaged, but they're at that point where they're just saying, hey, we want some tools to make sure we, maybe don't make the mistakes our parents did, or right. So it doesn't have to be even that you're having struggles, but you know what the statistics are about marriage in this country, right? Most people have not had super positive family models. So even if it's for that, with that lens, then you say, okay, we'll do a few sessions of premarital sessions and just to get the tools. um, when they do come to me, I mean, I think at that point you just got to say, gosh, can we just get it just a little further back, where this is not your last ditch thing, but this is like, hey, we're wrestling with some stuff. I wonder if there's somebody who could help us with some tools. And I love what you're saying. I mean, obviously I'm biased. I come from the coaching and counseling background. But I have my own counselor, and I really do feel like we could all benefit so much just from having somebody who can be neutral and mirror things back to us, and ideally have some tools to share. Because our minds are their own echo chamber. It's really almost impossible for any of us to step outside of that and really have a bird's eye perspective.
Yeah, it seems we only want to hear our own voice. So we only want our own opinion, and then when somebody challenged that, it's hard. And I mean, I get it, and then I can say, I'm sure, I have the privilege of having like a more emotional stability when it comes to this, and understand how things work in the brain to some extent. But once again, I do see a lot of people that once you start trying to plant an idea, hey, that this might work for you, since that new idea is so unfamiliar and it goes against their belief, it's almost a threat to their identity. And the brain, I mean, our nervous system wants to keep us safe. So it's like, no, we're going to stay in our mystery. We'd rather stay in our mystery than try something new that could be beneficial. And to just break that pattern is tough. Speaking of patterns, how do we become aware of these patterns? Not only how we think about ourselves, but in general, how we what we do as a couple that might not serve us, might not be working for us, but then we're so caught up in the routine that we miss these patterns.
Yeah, that's tough. Oh, I feel like that's incredibly difficult to do without a third party. I don't know how you do that, because I think to even notice that it's a pattern, to even notice that this is I tell people I'm really big on formulas, right? Like,
Mhm.
when you notice this plus this is going to be your new response. But to even get to that point of observation on your own is incredibly difficult. So I'll give you an example. There's a woman named MJ Ryan who writes a lot about habits and patterns and neuroscience and tools you can do. And she wrote this great piece years ago about the 3 stages of change. And the example she gives is that every day you go to work, you slip on a banana peel, you'll fall on your ass, and you're fucking miserable about it. And you don't want to do it again. But like every morning, you do the same thing: head off to work, walk down the path, slip on the banana peel, curse, go to work, do the thing. We all have things like that everyday annoyances that are just like annoying, but we haven't stopped to kind of process and figure out, and could I do this differently? So one day you go, this isn't working anymore. I want some help. I got to figure this out. And you go, you know what? This is not going to happen anymore. Tomorrow I'm going to walk around the banana peel or whatever. The next day you forget, you slip again and you fall on it. And that's the point, she says, where you have to recognize that change happens in 3 stages. And that middle stage is when you go, ah, crap, I did that thing again that I promised I wasn't going to do. I said I wasn't going to blow up at my kids. That's my, right? Like I said, I wasn't going to let this little thing annoy me. Or I was going to set myself up to, I have off the charts ADHD. So I'm going to set myself up to be on time for that meeting or whatever it is, right? And then you slip up. And that's the point where our brains go, it's all me. What's wrong with me? This is never going to get fixed. Forget it. But if you can recognize, no, that's progress because now you see it. Before you weren't even seeing it. Before it was just you kept doing this thing over and over and over and you couldn't figure out what was wrong. Now you see it and you have a plan. But then to get your brain to actually implement the plan, that's the next stage. So stage 3 is you pick up the banana peel, you throw it away, and you're good. So that's all of that to say we often need external help to even see it. You can know something's not working. We know when something doesn't feel right. But it can really help to have somebody to help us distill what to do about it and then to not get discouraged when you mess up again. So I tell my couples sometimes things are going to feel worse before they get better. And that's a good thing because it means you're hyper aware of exactly what you're doing. And then the next stage is you actually implement these things and do it differently. And that can snowball quickly. So building a new habit, once you unlock it, goes fast. It can. That was a long answer for a short
No,
question.
no, well, but no, no, I no, I love that answer because I like when you're very detailed about it and explain. Because to me, I think there's a lack of clarity in many different aspects of our lives that people are just assuming things and they think at how things work. It's like, well, are you really clear of what? And I can give you like a just like lame example with even with the word narcissism. Seems like
Yeah,
when you look at a social media, like no, every I mean, if your relationship didn't work, that's because you were dating a narcissist. Like, well, not necessarily, but yeah. So to me, it's like one thing I've tried to really do a lot of this podcast is like bring clarity to those kind of things and you giving lengthy answers. Okay, this is how you sort of identify patterns, and through a story, even just with a banana peel helps people just to visualize things better. Now, picking up the banana peel, that's the hardest thing because that's when you have to start implementing new routines or new actions, and that feels extremely uncomfortable.
it's true.
So, because of that, because of the communication issues, because I do believe that this is my perception as well, that many of these communication issues come from different narrative in a particular event. So let's say that you and I are in a relationship and you and I had a fight yesterday, and then we're going to talk about it today, but then we probably won't understand each other because you have a different version of the events, right? I saw it from one point of view and you saw it from a different point of view, and they're two different stories because at the end of the day our minds are tricky. I mean, our minds are not a very reliable narrator, but then we rely on them. How can we get better at identifying this issue, and what can we do to actually change it?
Ooh, that's tough. Yeah, there's a famous story about 3 blind men and an elephant, right? Where they're all describing it, but they're all touching different parts, right? So one saying that, oh, it's so smooth and silky, and another's touching the tail and it's rough and crinkly, and they all think the other one's lying, right? But no, they're all touching the elephant. Oh boy, we do have such different lenses, and I think one of the things is assume the best. Assume that your partner is seeing the world through their lens, and it's not going to look the same as your lens. Timing is really important. I think I just gave a TED talk on a similar topic. Um, this idea that we have extremely limited critical thinking capacity in a day. So it's not always ideal to try to figure things out in the moment. But there's also usually one partner that feels really strongly about needing to talk things out and another who wants more space. And so the trick is give some space to regulate, but limit that space so that you're finding that balance. And that often means, to your point, not trying to figure it all out at night, but saying something kind to your partner, even when you're angry, which is so hard, but hey, let's meet over coffee in the morning and talk through this, right? Set a time to talk through it and talk through it. When it gets to that point, I don't think there's easy answers. I think the best I can give to what you're saying is just to know that we are going to have a different perception and a different lens. I mean, it's proven that our brains, not strictly across gender lines, but most men and most women do neurologically process and compartmentalize and see things differently. That's part of it. And that's true in same sex couples too. We're usually drawn to our counterpart. But also just all our different experiences, our childhoods, our past relationships, all of that is influencing how we see a situation. So hear each other, assume the best, and be creative coming up with a solution that works for both.
Yeah, assuming the best is something that to me it was
Simple but not easy.
well, here's the thing. To me it was always common sense, but again, I realized many times that common sense is not common at all. To me, one of the things I would struggle in my past relationships or seeing friends struggle in their relationships, like they would assume that their partner, I mean, they would assume the worst out of their partners. Like, how? I mean, you are with that person for a reason. What would I assume that that person wanted to hurt you? That wanted
Yeah,
to, that the person wanted to put you down. I don't. To me, it doesn't make any sense.
agreed.
But going back to a point that you said about trying to understand each other, and to the initial point when you said, "Well, am I sure?" When if somebody's saying something, one common trend I've realized in this podcast, almost with anything, um, is that many things are solved by curiosity. If we're curious enough in a non-judgmental way, we can just even fix ourselves, fix other problems. But I think that we're lacking that curiosity because even if we, as I mentioned on my previous questions, like okay, you have a different story than mine, even though we both live the exact same situation, the exact same argument, to me it would be like, well, tell me exactly how you see it, and then I'm telling you what I saw. Because by the way, we can both be right and wrong. I mean, it's
That's
just a,
true.
it's like if we agree that we could potentially be both right and wrong, then let's find a solution. Let's be curious about it in a non-judgmental way. I'm not saying that you're wrong because you say it differently. You just see it differently because you're a different person. So
I'm actually writing that down. Many things are
okay.
solved by curiosity. I think that's such a beautiful line. That's such a great line. And that we can both be right and wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I, I, I just noticed it just recently when I kept asking because I, as you probably know now, I just like to go deep into the questions. I'm very very curious in that regard, and most of the common trends has been that has been being curious, which takes me to even point now with I think that in society and in couples in general, there's a lack of empathy, and I think people feel the empathy is about okay, do I feel the emotion that the other person is feeling? So no, can you put yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to understand and not trying to feel the emotion but trying to understand how they see the world, just be very just curious, make the effort, because once you see that, then you won't take things personally because now you understand how the person sort of operates, or just at least you have a broad idea. And 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 put the ego aside, because I do believe that we live in a society that acknowledging your pain diminishes mine. I was like, we can sort of both coexist in
Love that.
in that sense. But it's almost like, okay, how can I see? I'm asking not for myself because I'm aware of it, but then I can see how can I try to deliver this message to people. So okay, to help them understand how they can become aware of this, and and address this lack of empathy in a healthy way. Just become aware of the problems, and hey, it is okay if you try to understand the other person. You don't have to just be within your own thoughts or reality, I guess.
That's so beautifully put. Yeah, I love that. You're so right about that.
But in your experience, how can people become aware of, or at least how can they work on their empathy, I guess.
Hmm. Okay, so I have a tip for that. One of the things I walk through with my couples is a very specific form of active listening. So most
Okay.
people have done active listening in some way at work or at school or something, right? Active listening itself, simple but not easy. Very, very, very basic, right? So basically, one of you talks, the other person is going to like repeat before they take their turn. Um, there's a few tricks to it. The big thing is to be extremely concise, which is very hard to do when we're worked up, but your partner can generally remember a max of two sentences.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you have to hone in on the heart of exact, and that's a helpful exercise too when we're worked up, is to be like, what exactly is my pain about? Right? I have to concentrate it. So first person speaks one or two sentences, trying not to be accusatory, right? The other person tries to repeat word for word. No assumptions, no paraphrasing, because the whole point is to try not to filter it through our lens of past experience on the issue. And you go back and forth like that. But to add on and that often does just that, is often really helpful because you're taking some of the edge off of the intensity. You're truly being heard. And just that being heard can really affect the energy, the heightened energy of the situation. And you're both doing that for each other. But one sort of like bonus element of it is, if you can start when you do your reflection with one piece that you could own. It's not about blame. It's not about blame. But is there even a nugget, even if you're furious with your partner and it feels like what they're saying is complete crap? Can you find a nugget, 1%, where you're like, all right, I can see that, or I can own that, or I take responsibility for that. And you start with that when you reflect. So, Daniel, if you were telling me, like, God, Dawn, I can't stand it. I've asked you so many times to put your crap away. You're so disorganized. You're so messy everywhere. It gets into my stuff. I can't find anything. And I feel defensive. You know that with my ADHD, I can only find stuff if I have it out in my way, in my space. It's not bothering your stuff. Leave me the hell alone. But instead, I say, okay, I hear you that you've asked me this many times before. And there is that one part of the house that I committed and I messed up and I'm sorry. And, like starting like that.
Those those two sentences are, even I was thinking when you were saying that, it's like, even when I'm just calm, my brain goes all over the place,
Totally.
and it's hard to be concise. But knowing that is very helpful, because it would do two things. One, it would be, as you said, concise, but then it would allow the person the time to really think and trying to translate their emotions into words, like exactly what am I feeling and why am I feeling it. And I don't know where I read it. I don't know where I read it, but I read it in a book that says that to just calm the other person down and to make the other person feel that you validate their emotions. Say, hey, if I were you, I would feel exactly the same way that you do right now. It's like it's almost you're validating that, but because it's true. Because if you were her or if you were him, you would feel the same way. Because I mean, you are that person. But in that regard, when the person feels validated that their reaction is okay, is not wrong, then I think they lower their defenses.
100%. That's a beautiful way to put it. 100%.
Let's pivot a bit to a topic that I think a lot of people struggle, and you mentioned at the beginning, but not many people talk about, which is the intimacy. And yeah, sure, some couples are thriving in this, but I think that many others are struggling. And I feel that intimacy is one of those topics, one of those things that is hard to address because it requires a lot of vulnerability. It just
Yeah.
we don't want to be judged or dismissed by your partner because it's so intimate that
Yeah.
it's like, if you're a woman, then you feel that that you're not having enough sex, then you feel unattractive, or you feel fat, or you feel old, or you feel all these crazy stories that run in your head. And if you're a
Right.
man, then you feel that basically your wife, it doesn't love you anymore, or
Yes.
any of these crazy stories. And as I mentioned to you off cameras, or a few days ago, this quote from Neil Strauss. He said that unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments, and I think that many of these issues come from the fact that we are not saying what we need or what we want. Sure, we can say, "Hey, can you help me with the trash, or can you help me with the dishes, or can you help me with the kids?" But we don't express much of our needs when it comes to intimacy, and then we start expecting the other person to just know. And when the person doesn't know, then we start resenting them.
Exactly. Well, tell your audience I love having these conversations. I think it's an area, again, I wish we'd been taught this in school, myself in particular, that it's okay to talk about this, right? We are humans. We wouldn't exist without sex. Like this is as universal as you can get. There are very few things as universal as sexual desire. I mean, it's right there. Physical touch is, of course, one of the most common love languages. It's how we give and receive and understand love. And it doesn't just have to be sex, but intimacy, physical intimacy. And it's heartbreaking to me how many couples, again, going back to the cultural stuff, the implications, the generational stuff, don't or feel that they can't talk about it. And then that thing about fact versus assumption, gosh, this is one of the biggest areas. I see it all the time. And you're exactly right. We're often, again, not trying to make it about gender lines, but often women do feel they're not physically attracted to me. I'm not beautiful enough. I gained some weight. There's somebody else. They must be having an affair. And men often feel, right? Parentified happens a lot. Often there's a thing where, one person makes the other person feel like they're doing everything and ordering them around, and they fall into a dynamic that feels more like parent child, and that can be very emasculating if it's happening towards the man. So all of those things where it becomes more and more pulled apart and difficult to talk about. So that, one of the tips I'd say is don't assume, because there's a very, very more likely than not, it has nothing to do with any of those things where your head is jumping. It's not about the attraction not being there. It's not about trying to reject you. It's not about all the abandonment triggers that can come up when you feel rejected, which runs so deep and is so painful. Um, so often, again, you both want the same thing. You just don't know how to get there. And it is a tricky subject in the sense that I don't want anybody, married or not, to feel like they have to do something physically that they don't want to do. Of course. And at the same time, I do see so many couples where they're not having sex because of the busyness, because they don't know how to talk about it, because they don't know how to ask for what they need. And this is kind of piggybacking on the subject. I know it's a whole other thing, but non-traditional relationships, non-monogamous relationships, open relationships, what about all of that? Those are conversations I think that are important to have. Ask for what you need. It doesn't mean the other person has to do it, but this is your partner. Let's have these conversations, and if it helps to have them in a safe space with another person, then do that. I love having those conversations. There's lots of wonderful sex therapists and coaches and intimacy coaches out there, and I think having these conversations with a safe third person can make it easier.
Yeah, asking is I struggle with that in general. Just asking for help, asking for anything. I'm just very self-reliant, independent. But then we cannot do that. And even in those easy things, if we struggle with that already, once we are in a relationship, once we are having intimacy problems or any other kind of problem, if we don't ask, we're just not
Yeah.
gonna get anywhere. I just wonder how if somebody was having, I don't know, I don't know if intimacy problems would be the way, but then concerns or wasn't happy or it's like, you know what, it could be better. How can they start even addressing, how would that conversation start, how, because here's the thing, we all think about, well, I'm trying to find the perfect timing. Well, there's no perfect timing, you either do it or you don't. But then but then we procrastinate because we are avoiding the emotion of the uncomfortable, of being vulnerable. It's like, okay, how do we just go and take action and start addressing something in a very delicate and subtle way of, hey, this is what's going on.
So here, I love that question, and I do have a suggestion for that. Um, and this is true of any vulnerable topic. You're right that there's no perfect timing. Don't do it late at night for reasons I already addressed.
Check. Okay.
Right? So find a specific time, schedule it, tell your partner, hey, I have something kind of vulnerable I'd like to share with you. Can you make it, put constraints on it, make it small. So block off maybe 20 or 30 minutes. Don't try to make this, if it goes longer, that's fine. And have a concrete goal. Doesn't mean you hit that goal. But I think the reason so many people put this off is it feels so abstract, so hard to distill. It feels so big. So this is true of, let's say, finances. Often couples don't talk about finances because it feels so big. How do we sit down and have this conversation when we haven't had it in years to really understand what we're going to do here? When it's these heavy topics, um, have a goal and have it be a small goal. So maybe in that situation, the goal is, um, how would you feel about me initiating more? Or, I want to open up the conversation about bringing a third person in at some point, or I don't know, like whatever it is, but you don't have to resolve everything in that initial conversation. I would say the goal is pick one piece of the puzzle and have the goal be that I'm going to put it out there and tell you that I'm just opening the conversation and maybe we, think about it. We can have a longer conversation this weekend or something like that. So keeping it manageable, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think I like that. I like that a lot because what you want to do is you lower the stakes. I think
Exactly.
because when you and for you to lower the stakes, you need to address it as soon as possible. Because if you let it build up, then it's just gonna be a complete nightmare. I like that. And I think that one thing that men probably don't understand, and then I found out later, was that women feel connected or turn on or in desire throughout. It's almost like almost, and maybe might be a misconception of mine, through the entire sort of day how it goes. If you seem very helpful and then or supportive, or you listen to her and then she feels love in that way, right? She would be sort of like aroused, which men, we don't work that way. We are totally different. And then we think, well, if we do X, Y, and Z, then we arouse her. But then it's not how most women work, I think. And
Yeah,
if we know this, then we can just start not doing, not 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 treating it as a means to an end, but building that habit of just supporting your partner. And then I think that your sexual life probably will improve as a byproduct of it.
agreed. I think that's a great way of framing it. That's part of that neurological difference in how we communicate and process and prioritize. Men are much more able in general to compartmentalize, and women in general form a lot of connections. So things are very interwoven all day throughout the day. That's a great way of framing it. You're right.
Interesting. Don, I've been having an awesome conversation with you. I could go for far longer. It's just I'm really fascinated by this topic. But as a closing question, what are some of the practices that couple can start implementing into their life to have a healthy and thriving relationship?
I love that. Um, so the number one thing I would suggest is have a little tiny ritual of daily appreciation. And I like to do it, just as a bedtime thing. Let's say three things I'm grateful for, three things I appreciate about you. And it might feel weird and awkward if you're not used to having those intimate moments. And I say, with this whole process, we're talking about breaking bad habits and building good habits. Lean into the awkward. Who cares if it's awkward? Divorce is awkward.
Uh,
Like, lean into the awkward, right? Three things I appreciate about you. And that sounds so simple, but it works on so many levels because it's deepening intimacy and connection, but it works for what I was saying about the negativity bias and our brains being wired like caveman days. The Gottman Institute, you're probably familiar with them. They're kind of the foremost institute studying what makes successful relationships. And they talk about the magic ratio. And the magic ratio is 5 to 1. Harvard did a similar study in the workplace. It takes 5 positives to balance every single negative or perceived critique from someone. 5. So sometimes couples come in and one is like, oh my gosh, this person's so negative all the time. And the person's like, I literally just told you how beautiful you are. Both are true. If it's 50-50, it's going to feel terrible. So having a little ritual where you say a handful of things every day that are positive and beautiful, that you appreciate, that you're grateful for, goes a huge way. And then scheduling time for these meaningful conversations, for romantic dates, for trying something new. It almost doesn't matter what you try new. You're trying to almost trick your brain to shifting gears, to bringing in new information. Try new things, explore, have adventures together. Those are my tips.
Ah, I just want to know, where was that advice when I was in my relationship? Because
Oh,
because here's the thing, I realized, and this was probably like a learned behavior from my parents, and I've told him this. I grew up in an environment where, let's say, and I give this example all the time, that my mom was working and then I was at home, and then she would say, just please clean the kitchen. So I would clean the entire kitchen, but I forgot to clean the the countertops, and she would come back and then say, "Come on, what happened with the countertop?" So she would focus only on the negative things. Like, well, I did all of this. Now I grew up with that almost as a second nature, and I used to do that a lot in my relationship. So when you focus on the negative, when you focus on the things that the other person didn't do, and then you very little, because um, I think that a lot of women love languages could be words of affirmation and touch,
exactly.
and to me are acts of service and a physical touch. But our love language is only, I think that one of the misconceptions I found out about love language is that I think most of people have, is like, it's not about that you are going to give love in that way. It's like that's how you receive love, but you need to give
Yes,
love in a way that the other person feels love. So to me, my
exactly.
relationship, words of affirmation was hard because to me, it's like I never got. I mean, it doesn't matter. So looking back, I was probably, the ratio was like probably saying five negative things and one positive, which is like
So
not
painful.
working.
It's so painful. But as you were saying, simple and not easy, because I still do that to my kids too. I really do. It's hard.
Yeah, and the only way I was able to overcome that, or just after my relationship ended, it's like, hey, you didn't know any better, but now you know. So it's like, use it.
Yeah, it's
And
better.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, as you said, it's very, very simple and it doesn't take much. Just say things that you appreciate about your partner, even as a man, even if the same way, even if you tell her that she looks pretty, whatever, in your mind we think, well, but I wouldn't be with her. It's like almost like common sense, almost like it is known, but it's like, well, but she likes to hear it. So
Yes, exactly.
put the effort. Yeah. Done
That's
once again.
helpful. I could talk with you
Yeah.
for hours too,
I
Daniel. You're giving me a lot of great insight into the not only the male perspective, but with your upbringing and your divorce and all of that. It's really helpful to hear it with your lens and all the people you've spoken with. But you're right. That part is so interesting that doesn't come naturally to you at all, and why it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come naturally from a good place. That Of course you're beautiful. I wouldn't be with you if you weren't, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, and so and well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate them. But also, as again, I'm glad that you said that, because those simple things that we overlook, we think that the solution has to be more complex or harder or something that we have never thought about. Say, how come I can fix my marriage or my relationship just by doing this? Well, you'll be surprised
Yes,
with
exactly.
that. So
Exactly. Well, thank you, Daniel. This has been great.
once again, it's a pleasure. But where can people find you if they want to work with you or if you want to keep up with your work?
Appreciate that. It's relationshipcoachdawn.com.
Relationshipcoach.com. Perfect. Done. Once again, total pleasure. And I need to bring you back again because
I would love
there's
it.
a lot more things to talk about.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.